Welcome, everyone. My name is Molly Sachs, and on behalf of Campbell & Company, I'd like to thank you for joining Storytelling in Video, the second webinar in our Giving Tuesday series. Before we begin today's presentation, I'll quickly go through some logistics for those of you who are new to our webinars. Close any programs other than GoToWebinar that are running on your computer. We recommend calling in with a telephone instead of using your computer speakers, and to move your cell phone away from your computer. If you do experience visual issues, send a chat to Campbell & Company or contact GoToWebinar at the number on your screen. Today's webinar will last 30 minutes. We won't be sharing slides from the presentation, but we will be sending a link to the recording in a follow-up email. That email will also include a cheat sheet recapping the content and sharing additional tips to help you tell stories and create your own videos. We do welcome questions throughout the webinar, so please use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel that should be on the right side of your computer screen. We'll also hold time at the end for audience Q&A. At this point, we're all set to dive into storytelling and video. We're going to start off by telling you a little bit about ourselves. As I mentioned, I'm Molly Sachs, and I work on Campbell & Company's marketing and business development team. I've always been fascinated by how stories are constructed and used. I think it started with my childhood reading habit and was probably reinforced by my education in literature and marketing. In my work today, I think through how Campbell & Company leverages stories across media, including video, to connect with the nonprofit sector.
And I'm Susanna Young. I'm a senior consultant on our communications team based in Chicago. And I learned how to tell stories writing plays and short fiction way back in high school and college. And let me tell you, people are lying when they say to you that skills like that have no use in the real world. The ability to tell a good and an interesting story has been not just useful, but really essential at every point in my career. When I worked as a journalist, when I worked at a nonprofit chronicling and documenting the work of musicians and folk artists across the South, and then all the work I did for my clients as a creative director and copywriter in the agency world, and most especially to everything I do to help my clients at Campbell & Company make a compelling case for support today. And recently, I've done quite a bit of work at Campbell & Company helping nonprofits use video as a medium to tell their stories, which I'm excited to talk much more about in a few minutes here.
And I'm Anna Gorin, a consultant on our communications team based here in Seattle. And like Susanna and many other people in communications roles, I've always been drawn to writing. But my first job, academic writing for a research arm of a university, lacked that element of story, and it made it hard for me to connect to the writing in a deeper way. So ultimately, I turned to journalism and eventually nonprofit communications, where stories that connect us to other people and to our values are everywhere. Most recently, I completed a certificate in storytelling and digital content strategy from the University of Washington, where I learned to apply some of the best practices in storytelling from the marketing and business world to the nonprofit sector. So we know everyone took time out of a busy day to be here, so we're going to get right into it in 3 short sections. First, we'll get on the same page about what we mean when we say storytelling and why it's essential to nonprofit communications. And then Molly will lead us through a short conversation about why to use storytelling on a day like Giving Tuesday, with some tactical tips from Susanna and I for doing it well. And then we'll have a few minutes for Q&A. But before we get into all of that, I start by sharing a little story about coffee. This story starts way back in the 9th century in Ethiopia with a goat herder named Kaldi. One day he noticed that his goats were going a little bonkers. They were running around in circles and they wouldn't sleep through the night, which meant that Kaldi couldn't sleep through the night. And he noticed they had been eating these small red beans. So totally perplexed and exhausted, he gave the beans to an abbot in the local monastery, who discovered that a drink made from them kept him awake all through evening prayers. It was a hit with the monks and then with everyone else, and that's how we got our coffee. So I could have just told you that coffee was first discovered in the 9th century in Ethiopia by a goat herder, but instead you're much more likely to remember and even connect with that information because I told it in the form of a story. Maybe you'll think about that story next time you drink your cup of coffee, and that's exactly what you want a story to do, especially in fundraising.
So all of that is to say that storytelling is not just for fiction. And in fact, I'd be willing to bet that over and over through the past few months and even years, you've heard storytelling referenced in articles and books as the approach that you need to take to craft advertisements and institutional communications that really resonate. You know, I think we all know a good story when we hear one or see one, which says a lot about why it's such an effective communication strategy. But quote-unquote storytelling is something of an amorphous concept and a term I would say we throw around medium recklessly. I often find myself in the position of getting input, like make sure you're telling a compelling story, or people often give feedback like that. And oftentimes you're left wondering, okay, but what does that really mean, and how do I do that thing? And that's why today we're really going to spend some time demystifying storytelling and breaking it down into a practical, straightforward process and set of best practices that you can follow as you apply this approach to your organization's communications, especially and specifically for Giving Tuesday. So let's get started. One of your guiding lights as storytellers, which doubles as a piece of feedback that is most often given to bright-eyed, bushy-tailed novice writers in their first fiction writing workshops, should be show, don't tell. So here's the part where Anna and I follow our own advice and begin by showing you a great example of a storytelling approach to nonprofit communications. And that is a fantastic video from the Alzheimer's Association called The First Survivor. It's only a minute long and it does a lot in those 60 seconds, so we're just going to quickly play it now. And one important note for you, the audio is going to play through your computer, so make sure that you unmute your speakers now. So when Anna and I saw this video, we were immediately hooked, and I want to quickly unpack the reasons why, because the same reasons also make it an example of good and effective storytelling. So first of all, it starts with a provocative statement that immediately grabs your attention, and then the entire story unfolds from that one memorable message. They also start from a place that makes it clear that they understand where their viewers are coming from. I think circa 2018, it's safe to assume two things about what people know about Alzheimer's. A, that most everyone has heard of it and knows that it's a devastating disease that affects many people. And B, that most people watching the video have some kind of emotional or personal connection to Alzheimer's. But the nice thing about this video is that it makes it implicitly clear that they understand those things. And that's actually much more affecting than if the video were to say something like, through research and support for caregivers and patients, the Alzheimer's Association goes above and beyond to help your loved ones. That might be true, but if you're not careful, that kind of institutional framing can ring hollow. What's nice about this video is that it talks to you like a friend would talk to you about a problem. A friend doesn't just tell you outright that they're on the same page as you because they don't need to. They simply talk to you in a way that lets you know that they're here for you and that they love and understand you, and that's kind of what this video does. One of the ways the video makes it clear that the Alzheimer's Association understands what their audience wants to hear is that it frames the impact of the association's work in the most visionary and inspiring way, that the first survivor of Alzheimer's has already been born. When you get down to it, that is what people want to know and hear. That's what they really want to know, that the Alzheimer's Association is working to make possible. Another great thing about the video is that it tells a focused and complete story that still, in a good way, leaves you wanting more. I don't think anyone can say this enough. You should always focus on saying it well versus trying to say it all. And then finally, it's really short. Our phones have ruined our attention spans, so it's important to be realistic about how long even your most engaged supporters will spend with you.
So at its core, a story is one of the most fundamentally human ways to organize and share information. And that makes storytelling one of our most powerful tools for engaging people and building trust. And there are some basic elements that give a story that power. You'll be familiar with characters, plot, setting, some kind of conflict, which is usually the climax of a story, and then a resolution. So you'll see this in everything from advertisements to books and movies. And there's often some kind of idea or lesson or takeaway as part of that story. But in fundraising, there is some specific information you need to get across with your story. An entire case for support will likely include some context for, what stage we're playing on, an impetus, some reasoning for why this is urgent, a compelling vision for what will be different after your organization does its work, a credential, why your organization is the one to do it, a plan for what you're going to do, and then an appeal to donors, what they're going to do. So obviously in a format like GivingTuesday, we don't have time for gratuitous Oscar-worthy character development. And you may not tell a complete story in your video from start to finish, and that's okay. But you want to overlay a basic storytelling structure, the structure on the left that makes people care and makes them remember your information, with the information that donors need to know before making a gift, the information on the right. You want to find a way to build tension by establishing a problem and offering your organization's solution as the satisfying resolution. You want to add enough details to create a sense of setting, enough personalization so that the characters in your story are actually relatable. And most importantly, you want to invite your audience to do something at the end. So let's talk a little bit more about what else a story can do for your fundraising. First off, storytelling gives you the discipline to think about your audience first. So we know that good stories need that tension from a problem, but organizations sometimes create the wrong problems in their stories. Remember, you want to tell a story about what problem you're solving in the community. For example, students need better STEM education, not a story about your organization, like we really need to hire some people and here's why. A storytelling format forces you to ask those important questions. What motivates my audience? What kinds of experiences have our donors had themselves that they're likely to connect to? Will an average person reading about us for the first time know what sensory motor neural engineering means? Maybe I should say it in a different way. The story forces you to refocus on your mission and why it matters. Storytelling is also a very powerful tool that can manipulate human behavior. That's why it's become a popular device for sales and advertising. So remember to use it wisely. As you're thinking about putting together any kind of communication, think about what you want people to do after engaging with it and move backwards from there. Is it giving money for the first time, directing to your website, attending an event, just learning more about your organization and being able to repeat what you do to a stranger? Whatever it is, engaging with your content is never passive. So that Alzheimer's Association video was a great example. I know when I first saw it, it made me think, wow, it actually might be possible to cure Alzheimer's in my lifetime. That made me feel hopeful, and it made me want to learn more about how to get involved. So we can all take a lesson from the marketers and be intentional about what you want your audience to think, feel, and do.
But you shouldn't just take it from us, because it's not just your intuition or our intuition telling you that storytelling works. It's actually science. Experiencing character-driven stories activates oxytocin production, which is the same hormone that is released when you give someone a hug. And studies at the Center for Neuroeconomics at Claremont indicate that the amount of oxytocin released by people's brains after they watched charity-focused video narratives actually predicted how much people were willing to help others, including how willing they were to donate money to the nonprofit associated with the narrative. So all that is to say that stories, when they're told well, are a surefire way to encourage an empathetic response in your listeners, and that stories have the power to really inspire support. They're very effective at bringing your most faithful donors closer, and they're also great tools for broadening your audience.
At this point in the webinar, we're going to discuss how storytelling intersects with GivingTuesday and how videos factor into the mix. I'll be moderating a Q&A with Susanna and Anna, and then we'll have time for audience questions at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. Why should nonprofits use storytelling for GivingTuesday and other giving days?
Well, I think first, storytelling really helps cut through the clutter. And we all know how crowded the communications environment is, how crowded our news feeds are. And that's especially true on a day like GivingTuesday. But people can really see themselves in a story through the things that are familiar, those shared experiences and values, and that distinguishes it from all the other information coming at us online. So with all that competition, your opening message really matters. And we stressed this before after we watched that Alzheimer's Association video. You have a really short window to capture someone's attention online, maybe just 3 seconds before they move on. So make sure that first message is something powerful that you can build a story around.
Storytelling also makes your work accessible. We often find that organizations overuse jargon that makes sense internally or maybe for a grant application, but it's hard for the general public to connect to language like that, especially in a digital environment when you don't have a real person there to capture your attention or to clarify something for you. But stories are really easy for everyone to digest. And best practices say that language in a nonprofit communication for the public should be at a 6th grade reading level. And that might seem low, but it really does emphasize that it needs to be, presented in language that everyone gets. And a story can really keep you disciplined to do that. It's also important to remember that people are just going to stumble upon your organization on a day like Giving Tuesday. So you should just assume when you're creating those communications that people don't know a lot about your organization already and start from there. So it actually also, on that note, wouldn't be a bad idea to test out your script with an outsider, a friend, a sibling, a spouse, a partner, and see if they understand what you're trying to get across in the video that you develop.
Storytelling is also a great device because it forces you to focus your message. When you're telling a story, you can't say absolutely everything, and that's a good thing. You want people to lean in further. They're not going to do or know it all on a day like Giving Tuesday. So when you're thinking about what story to tell, think about what you want your one ultimate takeaway or action to be and build your story around that. And then you can make it really easy for people to get the rest of the information somewhere else. You can include clear links and directions to your various channels, just like the final frame in the Alzheimer's Association video. It also helps to make your video available in all the other places people learn about your organization, your website landing page, social media pages, even embedded at the bottom of your email, so you can really keep that story focused on that one takeaway.
So what kind of stories are most effective in fundraising?
So ideally, you want your story to first and foremost make a direct human communication. Whether your mission is concerned with global warming or animal welfare or tax policy, it's good to find the human story in your work that people can see themselves in, and when possible, to focus that story on a single subject. Research indicates that people are more likely to engage or donate when a story is centered on one person, one animal, one city. And that's due to a very real phenomenon called the identifiable victim effect. And that's the tendency that we all have to offer greater aid when a specific person or an individual is highlighted as needing help, rather than a large group of people needing help. So focusing on a single subject means you're more likely to really create that emotional connection, which we also know drives giving. And if you can't feature the stories of your actual beneficiaries, it's good to use a fictional or representative story that kind of achieves the same effect, kind of like the Alzheimer's Association video did. And I think it probably seems obvious that stories in fundraising need to have that kind of emotional hook, but a lot of people do feel daunted by the prospect of making that connection in a very short video. But we're here to tell you that it can be done. And in the supplementary handout that you'll receive after this webinar, we've included links to some examples of really great short videos from different sectors within the nonprofit sector and with different tones. And each of them tells a story that emotionally primes an audience in a different way. So you'll really see a whole sort of spectrum of ways for how to accomplish that aim.
I think connecting back to that human piece that Susanna just talked about, you also want stories that focus on the end state rather than the process. It may seem intuitive to show your audience how you do your work, but you can save that for a brochure or a conversation or your website, because with so little time in front of your audience, you'll want to focus your story on what's happening at the end. What are you making possible? What world are you building? And threat-based messages are important. They can be used for setup, absolutely, but they shouldn't function as the main thread of your story. People want to feel good to overcome the pain of parting with their cash, and they want to feel hopeful and optimistic about what they can do when they donate or partner with you. One tip is that data visualization and powerful statistics displayed on their own are a great way to build the tension or demonstrate and move through a problem in a story quickly, so that you can focus the emotional connection in the story on the solution or the positive outcome.
Are there any storytelling pitfalls that organizations should try to avoid?
Yes, and I would say that one thing that you want to be especially attentive to are the way that well-intentioned institutional communications sometimes accidentally reinforce stereotypes or maybe make the wrong assumptions about the motivations and feelings of the people and communities that they help through the ways that they tell the stories of those that they help. So the easiest way to avoid this pitfall is really to pass the mic. Whenever possible, let people share their own stories in their own words. And when you can't do this, it's important to make sure that you get buy-in and input from the people who are closest to the work and the communities you serve, like your program staff.
Another one that's easy to fall into is hopeless language. Language that makes your audience think, what's the point? It's hopeless, or, I don't even think that I can make a difference, versus what can I do to help? The problem with telling donors about 100,000 people in need or the devastating and irreversible effects of something like climate change is that it leaves them totally overwhelmed. They can't know and connect with thousands of people or comprehend fixing something like climate change, so it's easier just to tune out. And this isn't just a hunch, this is actually proven in multiple studies. And the solution isn't to sugarcoat the problem. People need to understand what's at stake, but to find a way to describe it on a scale that feels achievable or psychologically manageable so that a solution does too. So for example, you could back up statistics about the rising costs of higher education with the story of one scholarship recipient who made it to college thanks to your work. Or if you're addressing something sweeping like climate change, look for the policy benchmarks coming up in next year's election to show how progress is being made, and share the story of a specific river or county where you were able to leave a mark that people can connect to.
What about GivingTuesday specifically? How can organizations use video to tell stories on Giving Days?
So obviously you're only limited by your imagination and your budget here when it comes to creating videos for GivingTuesday, but we wanted to cover 3 different types of videos that we think can make an especially big splash on a day like GivingTuesday. And the first one we want to talk about are live videos that you shoot on your phone. These are really simple to coordinate, and they're not expensive or resource intensive to produce, which is great if you're on a tight budget or maybe you haven't had much time to prepare for GivingTuesday communications. Live videos also give you an opportunity to showcase your people and show your mission in action, which is especially great if you're a nonprofit where just seeing the work that you do in progress makes a big impact on potential donors, like if you're an animal welfare organization or potentially a food pantry. And these live videos can also be an effective way to show your supporters the progress that you're making on a large-scale project. You could potentially show construction on a building that you might be in a campaign to help create, or show a window into a program or a class that's in progress that your donors' generosity helped create. And since you're shooting them on your phone, they're very easy to produce on the fly throughout the day if inspiration strikes you. You can also, whether you do this via live video or something that's more professionally produced, use video to tell your donors' stories. And this can really be a nice cultivation or stewardship opportunity, and it's also a chance for your audience of current and potential donors to hear from donors themselves why they're compelled to give. And putting that ask in a donor's mouth can really do a lot to build community and camaraderie within your group of potential supporters. And finally, you can explore ways to really get your own supporters involved in making GivingTuesday videos. You could potentially invite them to submit a short video explaining why they give, why they care about your cause, and then you can post them through your own social media channels and repost them throughout GivingTuesday. Though we do know that for a tactic like this to be effective, it's important to already have an engaged base and likely a strong social media presence for something like this to make a big splash.
What other tactical tips for video do you have?
Yeah, there's a few things you can do to make the most out of these videos. I think one of the first things is making sure that you highlight people and projects that are illustrative of your mission in a really clear and direct way. I think people are just less likely to care about a talking head on the screen unless they can really do that. Storyboarding your videos is always a good idea, even if they're really short, because every story has multiple components. They have some kind of setup, some kind of emotional connection, and then some kind of call to action, particularly on GivingTuesday. So storyboarding can help you think through what you show visually versus what you say with a voiceover versus what is written out on screen. And that helps you root out any problems before they occur. Storyboarding also helps you think about a story in these distinct parts and make sure that it flows right and that the right information is being shared at the right time. It also does not have to be live video. You can definitely tell a story through animation, motion graphics. You can use still photos and the Ken Burns effect, voiceover, etc. There are just so many different ways to do this, and we've included a few different examples in the handout we'll share after this webinar. It's also a great idea, for this year on GivingTuesday to take note of the videos that really engaged you, that you really like, to take note of for next time. Adding subtitles to videos for social media is always a good idea as well. It can help people follow along and capture their attention when they're just scrolling by with the sound off, which we've all done at work, and can make sure that you cast the widest net. Just because you made a great video doesn't mean people will see it, so sharing videos across platforms is a must. Your social media accounts, your website, your email. You can you want to make this kind of video impossible to miss. And a good way to do that is also to find ambassadors for your cause with large followings who can be queued up to share the video, perhaps with a personal message or ask on GivingTuesday. And finally, you could experiment with something like a video campaign, so telling one story through several videos over the course of one day. And that's a great way to help people continue to engage with your story and with your organization, even if after they've donated on GivingTuesday. So even though your GivingTuesday video doesn't need to break the bank, as Susanna noted with some of those tips, creating a video does take an investment of time and some resources, as many of you will know if you've done it in the past. So consider a story that can live beyond just this one day. You can include GivingTuesday links and hashtags as subtitles or closing frames so that the story about your mission can live on afterwards.
What about specific examples? Do you have any that you can share with the audience?
We do. We just didn't want to take up your time sitting in silence while we played video after video. But honestly, just like reading great writing is a big part of how you become a better writer. Watching really good videos is the best way to really kind of crystallize or internalize a lot of what we've been talking about today. So in this supplementary document cheat sheet that we'll be sending you, there are links to videos that have been created by a broad range of organizations across a wide variety of sectors. We've got everything in there from the Chicago Children's Choir to the Wilderness Society. And we've also included videos that tell stories in different ways and through different formats to kind of show you a couple of creative ways to put into practice some of the tips that we've covered today. It's also, I do want to note that the supplementary document includes more tactical or pragmatic tips to do some of the things that we've accomplished or recommended today as well, including some tips for how to collect people's stories, how to work with production partners, and then also how to do a great video on a tight budget.
Great. Well, at this point, we're going to open it up to your questions. We have a few minutes. Do we have any questions from the audience?
It looks like we don't at the moment. So if you do, please send it through the questions box in the GoTo control panel.
Yeah, we encourage you to send in your questions, but we can take a few more minutes to talk a little bit more about the tactical tips. So Susanna and Anna, do you have any tips for the actual collection or gathering of stories?
I would say that the best way to do that is to talk to your program staff first, anyone who is directly involved in serving your mission, who is going to have the clearest window into the work that's happening on the ground and the people and communities that you're serving, and to talk to them first to really get a sense for who might be good at sharing their story and the best way to go about approaching it. Would you add anything else to that, Anna? Are there other ideas that you have?
Yeah, I would say on top of that, just avoiding a process where where you're too prescriptive at the get-go of saying we want to tell exactly this story, because it may be that if by connecting with the program staff, you may find something different that you may not have thought of before that actually is illustrative of your mission in a way you haven't thought about, or just truly tells the most compelling story based on the actual work that's being done.
Great. Holly, it looks like we have a few questions now. Anna and Susanna, what would you say the recommended length would be for videos?
Susanna, I would say not to go much longer than the 60 seconds that was in the Alzheimer's Association video for a format like this. I think for just general video, I think 2 to 3 minutes is a standard that we see for things like campaigns, et cetera. But what do you think?
I think for GivingTuesday, keeping them shorter is better, knowing that people are going to be seeing them pop up on their Twitter feeds and social media channels. So I think that keeping it in the 30 to 60 seconds is probably a good form there. But I do think that you can go up to 2 or 3 minutes and still keep it lively and entertaining as long as you're attentive to things like pacing and making sure there's that rise and fall in action if you are exploring a topic that needs a video of that length.
I would also add, it's always helpful to think about, where you're going to be pushing this out, what communication channel, as Susanna mentioned. So if this is something that you're thinking of, sharing with a one-to-one donor communication, it could be a little bit longer. But, if it's something for GivingTuesday, it's probably going to need to be a little bit shorter to capture people's attention on social media.
Yeah, when you don't have a captive audience, I think keeping it shorter is better.
Great, and it looks like we have time for one more question. Can you speak a little bit more on how to tell your story if you don't have a direct service organization?
Yeah, I think I would go back to one of the tips we included in the webinar, which was around finding the human connection. And when you can't find the human connection, I think finding the most emotionally resonant or personal connection. We've worked with a lot of organizations, in the environment, or even working on big, more complicated systems change type organizations that don't necessarily have that super easy, clear story of, providing a direct service. And there usually, almost always, is some kind of personal, emotionally resonant story that a wide group of people can connect to, that shows the impact of your work. So again, connecting with the folks that are doing the work and finding, those stories of impact, and framing it through that single story can be one way to do it. Susanna, what would you add to that?
No, I think that's kind of what I would recommend as well, and maybe sort of thinking about it through the lens of what does a world where my mission has already been achieved look like, and then kind of talk about what it takes to get to that state. So maybe thinking about it from that perspective could be a helpful way to get started and kind of tease some of those ways to bring that out from your staff.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. That is all the time we have today. But I remind you to look out for our email with the webinar recording and the cheat sheet. And please feel free to get in touch with Susanna, Anna, or me with any future questions. We also encourage you to sign up for the other Giving Tuesday webinars in our series. Next up is email strategy on September 17th. So please enjoy the rest of your day and join us for those future webinars. Thank you.